Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee with Craig, brought to you by Sacramento Black Rifle and Sparks Black Rifle, partners with us here in the Firearms Policy Coalition and Coffee with Craig. Thank you so much for tuning in and for joining the conversation. Please take a moment to like and share this video feed, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook. Please do so that your friends can become our friends and join in the conversation. We are, once again, so happy to have you. Today's topic is going to be an interesting one because, well, when we talk about the fight for gun rights, we talk about the fight to keep and bear arms, largely we're fighting against a group of individuals who've coined this phrase called gun violence. And what they've done is they've grouped within this phrase gun violence anyone who has died as a result of a fire or died by firearm, whether we're talking about criminals, whether we're talking about terrorists, whether we're talking about whatever it is, whether it was actually an act of violence or not. And one of the things that they include in this group that they deem as gun violence are those who, in fact, commit suicide. Now, many don't know this, but 2/3 of all gun deaths are actually suicides. These are individuals who have, for one reason or another, chosen to take their own lives. And one of the things that we say here quite honestly is that we believe that whenever it comes to how a gun is used, it's usually a people thing. It's not a gun thing. Guns are tools. And some people use those tools to inflict violence on others. And unfortunately, some people use tools to inflict violence upon themselves. Simply banning or eliminating or getting rid of the tool does not deal with or address the underlying issue that would cause someone to commit violence. And in this case of suicide, we're talking about violence against themselves. So there was an article that was written by a Mr. Jeff Rauner. I'm not even really concerned about how to pronounce his name correctly because he spells his name with one F. What Jeff spells their name with one F? Anyway, we'll talk about that later. But he wrote an article in the Houston Press, and in it he titled Why White Men Desperately Need Gun Control. Now, in this, he primarily talks about gun control and the aspect of addressing the issue of suicide. Many of us know, if you look at who is committing suicide in probably some of the largest numbers, it generally tends to be, at least in the United States, white males over the age of 40. For one reason or another. And one of the things that Mr. Rohner points out is that, well, because white men tend to commit suicide more often, at a higher rate than other groups. And because they also happen to more likely be gun owners. And, oh, by the way, even when you look at MASHES, even when you look beyond just suicide, that, well, most mass shooters are white males. Now, once again, he doesn't really offer any real statistics. These are all just anecdotal evidence and things that he's discussing and talking about as to why white men need gun control. He probably believes it because, well, hey, if you're a white male over the age of 40, there's a greater likelihood that you are of the conservative ilk rather than the liberal ilk. But that wasn't part of his conversation. I just kind of think that's where he was thinking. But one of the things that I found very interesting that the individual seemed to ignore in this whole conversation was that in countries where where guns have been banned, suicide actually is prevalent and on the rise. One of those countries is the one that we're often told that we need to be more like Australia. There was an article talking about suicide rates in Australia. In 2016, in fact, suicide rates were at a 10-year high. One person every 3 hours in Australia was committing suicide. It said here, in average, the average age of someone who was dying from suicide was 44 years old. It also noted that in 2015, suicide accounted for 1/3 of deaths. That's 33.9% among people 15 to 24. So in Australia, even young people are committing suicide. What they found is that suicide rates have not gone down in Australia without firearms. In fact, suicide rates are on the rise. Now, I'm not saying that they're on the rise because firearms are banned. I'm just saying that the banning of firearms, handguns in particular in this case, has not eliminated or even reduced the number of suicides in Australia. So if we're to follow the Australian model because, well, hey, that'll reduce gun violence, well, guess what? It won't reduce gun suicides, and we know that to be true. So, but is that the only country? I mean, is that the only country where that's taking place? No, not exactly. Let's look at, I don't know, Japan. That's right. In Japan, it's noting that, yes, suicides are down. But Japan, who, by the way, has completely banned private firearm ownership, Japan still has the second highest rate among major industrialized nations. Now, among all nations, they're sixth. But amongst industrialized nations, and the only reason why I throw in industrialized nations is because, well, that's what they like to use. They like to say, well, amongst industrialized nations, these things don't happen. Well, guess what? Yes, they do. Japan is second amongst industrialized nations, sixth overall when it comes to the suicide rate. Japan's suicide rate, the number of deaths per 100,000 people, was at 19.5. Russia topped the list with 21.8. But Japan's rate is higher than France, higher than the U.S., higher than Germany, and higher than Canada. The highest rate observed it was Lithuania. This is amongst all countries with 30.8. That's followed by South Korea, which has 24.2. Now, I find it interesting that South Korea is not considered industrialized, but okay. The thing that I'm trying to get you guys to see here is this, is that all of this talk about suicide, and what's even funnier is that when you talk about a lot of the laws relating to gun control, things like magazine capacity. Now, last I checked, I don't think it matters whether someone has 10 rounds versus 30 rounds if they're looking to commit suicide. I'm finding it hard to believe that people are utilizing more than one round. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I'm finding that to be a little oxymoronish. Then there's also the issue of quote unquote assault weapons. Does it really matter if someone is using an AR-15 if they're trying to commit suicide? I would think that a handgun would work just as good. I mean, once again, we're talking about 2/3 of deaths, firearm deaths, are suicides. Then why are we talking about assault weapons bans? How can you then use that as an argument to reduce the number of suicides? You can't. But, then again, that sort of information is really kind of nonsensical to them because they're really not interested in information. They're really not interested in the facts surrounding these particular issues. I guess, once again, it just goes back to the whole point, once again, that I was trying to make regarding gun violence is a violence issue, and violence is a people issue. It's not a tool issue. It's not a gun issue. You will not reduce violence by banning guns. You will not reduce suicide by banning guns. You will reduce suicide by working with and figuring out ways in which to address the issues that people are dealing with when they are hurting, whether it's mental health, whether it's depression, whatever area it is that you need to be addressing. That's how you address the issue of suicide and suicide prevention. If it's gun violence, how do we deal with the issue of gangs and drugs in our society, of fatherlessness, of lack of economic opportunity in some cases? How do you address those issues? Addressing those issues will address the issues of gangs and gang violence. But banning guns only hurts people who are seeking to defend themselves from those who seek to impose violence against them. And that's about it. So once again, for those of you out there who are watching who would say, hey, we need to follow Australia or Japan or these other countries who've banned guns, just a note, yeah, the numbers don't bear out that it's having the impact that you believe that it is having. Just saying. Anyway, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for liking and sharing these videos and being a part in the fight for our civil rights. Remember, got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.